welcome back to another episode of the Counterculture Podcast. I'm your host, Christian, along with my great friend and co-host, Taylor.
What's up?
And, just welcome back. I know if you are someone that is willing to stick with us at this point, you're willing to stick with the inconsistency of us uploading stuff sometimes.
That's a fair point.
But, hey, you know what? Life happens, right? We had an idea for this, recording, which we're doing today, and we didn't have everything pulled together. So just, hey, instead of just throwing the camera on and just, flying by the seat of our pants, we're trying to be structured somewhat.
Which is weird because the first year of us doing the podcast, we were very structured.
We were very, very structured.
In fact,
if you've been with us this long, you know.
In fact, some of us used to say, like, we need to riff a little bit more.
You're like, loosen up.
And then
fucking relax.
Like, the second year is pretty much nothing but riffing and talking. So we're going to kind of give you a nice match.
So at some point, we'll figure out something like a happy medium that actually is somewhat professional. And then maybe we do get to a point where this is, something that makes money. Who knows? So, before we jump into it, obviously make sure you hit the notification bell below so you can get notifications when we actually do upload videos. Hit the subscribe button. Share the show with your friends. And you can find us at the Counterculture Cast on Instagram, where we do post and mostly do stuff. We do have other social medias, but we really don't do anything. Like, I used to be pretty good about uploading new episodes or links onto our Facebook page, and I just stopped because Facebook is for boomers.
Yeah,
so,
we all have our duties, but some of us suffer in those.
Yeah. And some of us, the duty...
Mainly me.
Well, and here's the thing. Your end of the bargain is most important because if you don't edit and upload it, well, there is no content.
Yeah, and yours is nothing but the growth. So
yeah, I guess
outreach.
I guess you should be
you're
surprised.
You're just stuck with us. This is more hobby anyways.
It's a hobby. We have families. We're both husbands. We got 3 kids.
Right.
We got shit going on.
We do this for fun. We do it because we enjoy it. So if we miss a week here or there, guess what? That's just life, and we'll be back.
Yeah.
So
it's like Arnold. Yeah. Did you see
like,
the thing
hey,
about him?
Arnold? What are you talking about?
I said it's like Arnold because you said we'll be back.
Oh,
I'll be back.
You.
Come on,
I
dude.
thought you were saying like some kind of like Hey Arnold reference or.
Oh no.
Gotcha.
Oh, that was a good show though.
It wasn't bad.
Hey Arnold back in the day.
Weird.
Very odd, yeah. The football head thing. Very odd. Very odd. I mean, but speaking of Arnold Schwarzenegger, did you see that? I guess Netflix is bringing him in as like I think they're calling it Chief Action Officer. I don't think that's his actual title, but I think they're bringing him in as a consultant to do action movies.
Hey, honestly, cool.
Oh, yeah. I think it's a good idea.
If you look at it, that's kind of what they did without the gimmicky title and all that with Sandler. They did this huge deal to bring Sandler for comedy for Netflix. Mm-hmm. And with that, I mean, even if it wasn't him actually in it, it's, all of his little friend groups, that he's in, his production company. They've all had these different little movies and stuff that have come out the last couple of years. He did like a 12-movie deal or something.
Oh, really?
With Netflix.
Okay, I didn't know it was that big, yeah.
I guess that's what they're doing as far as for action for Arnold. I didn't know that they promoted him or brought him on with an actual title. I did see that he came out and did this it's like an 8-show series called Fubar that just came out on Netflix.
Oh yeah,
It's like brand new, and I don't know if it's any good yet, so don't take my recommendation, but I plan on watching it.
Yeah, I saw that. Well, I only saw that because they did there was like a little commercial with him and Chris Hemsworth. And Chris Hemsworth, was talking to him about it, and it's kind of cheesy, whatever. But I know Hemsworth is...
Hemsworth's coming out with Extraction too.
I did see that. It looks pretty intense. The thing is, I think Hemsworth could be kind of the next, action star if he really, kind of embraced that... Not that he's, fighting, but if he embraced that role as, just being, the action... The action...
Just step into
guy.
those shoes.
Yeah.
I mean, they're already kind of filled out for him. He could be. And if you think about it,
well,
we don't have...
he's leaving... I mean, it's not official, but I mean, he's going to be done with the MCU, I think, eventually here pretty soon, so...
You say that, but different timelines, who knows? It's like RDJ when he went on the Rogan's podcast, 2 years ago, and was talking about... And Rogan's like, yeah, but you got, different timelines now and time machines.
Yeah, he's like, well, it's time... Yeah. Rogan's like, well, there's, time travel, so basically anything can happen. And Downey's like, yeah, pretty much.
It's like, yeah, I guess you're right.
To me, honestly, I think if Disney approached him with enough of amount of money, that he'd say, yeah, because you don't have to do anything.
It really just depends. That's at this point, these guys don't necessarily need more money, so they're just kind of like, when you get to the point where you can say no to money because you have enough money, it's got to be a pretty good feeling.
But people in Hollywood don't really say no to money, though.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. So, anyway, to what we actually are going to talk about today. So,
well, it's kind of related because we're talking about shows. We're talking about...
It is a documentary we're talking about. So, that's true. Good segue. So we want to talk about this documentary that is come out somewhat recently. Actually, I should probably see exactly when it came out.
2022?
I think it was 2022. Yes.
Because in the documentary, I think they were referencing 2022 data. Or was it 2020 data?
So it was featured at the Chelsea Film Festival in 2021, actually.
Okay.
So, and I think he's had they've revised it a little bit leading up to it. But the name of this documentary is called Birth Gap, and it's by a gentleman named Dr. Stephen Shaw. And the way I found out about this initially was from Christina, because Christina loves Jordan Peterson, like I do. Shocker. We listen to him every morning together. But she likes to listen to some of his podcasts because he brings on interesting people, whether they talk about parenting or health, all that kind of stuff. Like she had one that she listened to about health recently. I remind me to tell you about it because I think you would enjoy that one. But anyway, and so this guy came on here because the title of that interview, which we should probably link in our show, just because it's really interesting actually. It's titled the epidemic that no one wants to talk about, something along those lines. And that's where we first heard about it, because he's talking to him about his documentary and about the growing issue of childlessness and low fertility rates, not only in the U.S. but across the entire globe.
Yeah,
in meaning the entire industrialized world. And so Stephen Shaw, or Dr. Stephen Shaw, set out in 2016 to figure out kind of what is going on. Right, because one of the biggest things he points out, this is right in the beginning of this documentary, which again we'll put in the show notes too. Or you can just Google or go on YouTube and put in Birth Gap. The first part that we're gonna talk about is on YouTube, so you can find it. It's definitely worth a watch. It's very interesting. But so right away he talks about how 70% of people live in a country that are below what he calls the population tipping point, or what would be considered like the replacement rate.
Yeah.
Right, which I just from the get-go, I thought that was pretty shocking, right? Because I think because we talked about this, I think last year maybe, or beginning of this year, about Elon talking about the need of people having more babies.
Yeah, I mean, we've went touch and go on this topic without directly addressing it a few times, I feel like, just in different ways, whether it's even about like legacy. We've talked about that and how people aren't wanting to start having kids. And we've always talked about like, man, you and me both wanted, like, more than anything is just to have a family and have a family young, to start that, because it's something we both wanted. Whereas, I mean, especially as you go to watch the documentary, I'm like, last night I was watching with my wife in preparation for this, and I'm like practically screaming at the TV. Because if you go and watch it, a lot of it is like they were interviewing different people across the world, different like strangers in the street, trying to get their opinion, trying to get like the 411, like 411 on the ground, boots on the ground kind of thing. And I'm like, nobody knew, nobody cared. And it's something that's so important to us that I don't know. Like you were saying, we've talked about it, but not directly about the actual birth gap.
Right, absolutely. And really, what's interesting is if this documentary continues to grow and everything, like I certainly hope it does, the term birth gap will become a kind of like a household sort of term, because people will start to understand the thing that's happening. And again, it's been in the news within the last couple of years of the lowering fertility rates, all that kind of stuff. And it's starting to get people's attention, where people are starting to really notice that.
Yeah. How would you explain birth gap then? Because it's to the viewers here, I guess it would be,
So the birth
it's not
gap
just birth
is,
rates.
Right. So what it is, actually, scroll down the notes a little bit because I did get like kind of a definition of it. I should have probably put it at the very top, but yeah. So here it is. So just to give you an idea of a birth gap, right? So this was in 2019. Scroll down a little bit. So the number of people that at age 50, right, was 1 million, right? And the number of newborn, which and he does 50 because in about 20 years they'll be at retirement age. Scroll up a little bit. Right there is perfect. So,
oh, I see it now.
Yeah. So in 2019 in Italy, there was 1 million people that were the age of 50, and of course, like I just said, in 20 years they would have retired, right? Because they'd be age 70. And the number of newborns at that time was right around 490-ish thousand, so right under half, right? And they would be entering the workforce in about that 20-year time. So the birth gap would be described as a large gap between the number of newborns versus the number of 50-year-olds they would be supporting in retirement.
Right.
So that is what he's gauging all of these off of, right? Is how many people that are age 50 in a country versus how many newborns at that time, and that tells you what
right, because by those time those
50-year-olds
are turning 70, they're entering retirement, they're going to be dependent on welfare, social security systems. Like with that workforce that's newborn is then 20, they're working, their checks are going to the government to provide, assistance for those elderly.
Right.
It's this, but it's starting to turn into this, instead of this building block going straight up, or actually you'd probably want it more like a pyramid because people die, natural causes, things like that. So you'd always want to be ideally having more births than people towards the end. But what we're actually starting to see is this upside down pyramid, upside down triangle.
Correct. Right.
And it can crumble, which is funny because when watching the documentary, and I'm sure we're going to get into some of the finer stats, some of the biggest countries that this came on was on their radar sooner. And I've talked about it on the show too, because we were talking about it in Denmark about I think it was like a year or so ago. I was talking about they were having the sex ads.
Yeah, do it for Denmark. Yeah.
So I brought that up, and it's funny because I didn't necessarily think, I wasn't thinking birth gap. I just knew people weren't having kids, and we've talked about family on the show. Why it's important for us to have kids, legacy, so on and so forth. But they're freaking out because these are all like socialist countries, or they have a lot of social programs,
right? They
free
have
health care.
Yeah.
These are countries that like have a year's paid like maternity, paternity leave. Like there's a lot of money set aside because number one, they don't have large, militaries to fund, so they can do a lot of these programs.
Yeah, that must be nice.
But when you have all these systems in place and you know how much it's going to cost, and you can see on the horizon there's going to be fewer and fewer people to fund this, but the number of people that you need to support isn't going down. It's like this wake up call, like we got to do something now. Whereas other countries aren't really, especially like America. I was talking about in the documentary too. We're going to be one of the last ones to be affected by this.
Right. Well, we're in a unique position to kind of watch this from afar, mostly because one of the things that has kind of staved this off for us is the fact that we've had such a large amount of immigration into the United States versus most other countries. Right? Most other countries aren't having large amounts of immigration coming in, and so that has kind of helped us. But at the end of the day, this is affecting all industrialized countries.
But even with immigration, though, immigration means there's ideally going to be more people that more mouths to feed, not necessarily more children. But what I think that stat means to me is that more people are coming to this land of opportunity, the American dream, and they're more willing to now set roots and have those families. Whereas maybe in their countries they were waiting, or they wanted to escape, or they wanted to wait and save money to get to America. I think once they get here, it's more like we made it, like let's start having families. To me, otherwise,
yeah, it depends, because there are some stories of the husband will come and I think it's in the documentary, or maybe it's he talks about it in his interview with Jordan. I can't remember, but like a husband who is in the United States most of the time, and then he comes like
back and forth,
yeah, and so that they don't have children because he's never around, right? Because I know some people think like having children is super easy, right? But
well, then how would that particular stat throw off the numbers as making America look better off? It's because he's under 50.
Yeah, I mean, it's but again, well, yeah, it's because it's under 50 because of course for the
metrics, yeah,
for the metrics of this, right? It's just for each year, it's the number of 50-year-olds and then number of newborns, because it's like that's who's gonna be, I guess, have the most responsibility of trying to take care of these retirees, right? And so to your point, like this upside down triangle, that is, and again, this isn't something that we have talked about in the U.S. in different ways without just talking about this particular issue, right? Because we've talked about like Social Security. I mean, the joke of anyone who's a millennial is like, yeah, Social Security is going to be gone well before we're in retirement, which is true. I mean, because simply there's not enough people to support the amount of
the
retirees,
demand that's going to be there,
right? Plus, also, Social Security is just a Ponzi scheme and a scam, and it was the stupidest thing ever done. But besides the point of that, is just it's also like the Medicare and Medicaid, all those kind of things. Like those are all, again, we pay for those things, right? And eventually, it's going to become too much of a burden. So what do you do, right? And to the point, I think one of the professors that's interviewed in the documentary, there's no precedent for this happening, so we don't know what's going to happen per se. I mean, I think it's sort of obvious, but I think like the everyday ramifications of it, we really are not going to be aware of. Like we can say big picture things like, okay, like I said, like Social Security programs collapse or social welfare programs collapse, but then what's the ripple effect of those things happening, right? We don't really know. So it's kind of tough. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because for a long time, everybody was talking about, climate change, global warming. We need to lessen the human footprint. So you think a decrease in population would be good, but at the rate at which this is happening, it's going to be on a scale that's like almost like the snap from Thanos, if we're not careful in 50 years time, because what's going to happen is, I mean, even look at it now, look at the last 20 years when we were going through school, even just for example, like the push for everybody to go to school, everybody to get higher education.
Mm-hmm.
Where's your blue collar jobs? That's why welders got in demand and welders get this money. Like, where's all the people to collect your trash and stuff? Because the problem was everybody went to school. So suddenly your degree was almost meaningless. It was like something that was more required, a prereq. Some people were working at Jamba Juice while, having a bachelor's or working on their master's. Like
that's still happening now.
Right.
A lot. And it's funny, we mentioned that too, like welders or plumbers, electricians. Before you know it, right, those guys are going to continuously become more and more valuable and be able to charge more and more for their services because no one knows how to do that, right? And as a society, we tend to look down upon those guys, which is just, and one of the things that just bugs the crap out of me is just the level of credentialism that the America thrives on a social level is just really just annoying. Right. Again, nothing to take away. Like, again, some of those things are very important, right? You become an executive at a company or a doctor, surgeon. Like, those things are really important. But you
do you. But, I mean, even what's going to happen is like, okay, let's just say there's 100 candidates and 20 of them are like above board to where they could all get doctor jobs. Well, you've got 20 different people that all got the same education. They all passed the same test, got the same scores. That's 20 different people that can be working on cures. 20 different minds that may think a little differently that are working towards different goals, whether just in healthcare. So let's just say the population shrinks within the next 20 years. Now you only got 50 people that have all passed the test, got the same scores. Of those 50 people, like, what was I saying, 20 before, now you're down to like 10 minds instead of 20. So what I was looking at is long-term, not just on who's having kids and population shrink, is it's like humanity at the scale at which technology has been ramping up at an accelerated pace over the last 50 years. You think Industrial Revolution, the birth, invention of the cotton gin, everything's skyrocketed. Just cell phone technology and everything in the last 10 years. Like what we can do here in our pocket is like, you've heard this saying is like, it's more advanced than the technology that was in the space shuttle or at, the command center to send people to the moon. Mm-hmm. If you believe they even got to the moon, I do though. But it's
a
so basically
conspiracy.
You're going to slow down advancements in healthcare, in research, in technology. I mean, Silicon Valley. Okay, well, right now it's too much, but eventually that's going to slow down too, because there's not going to be enough people there. And then you're talking about infrastructure.
It's also worthless because they provide no good for the world.
True. Nobody needs the newest iPhone 30 by then. But yeah, then you go back to the welders, the trash men. Like, I mean, society could start to crumble just because there's nobody to take care of the buildings. Who's going to be building new buildings? Mm-hmm. Next thing you know, we're living in, instead of new buildings getting made, we're trying to rejuvenate and fix the buildings and downtowns that we already have.
It's okay. We will AI will save us.
I'll be with Elon. We'll be going to Mars. The brightest minds will be going that way, I guess. I don't know. But speaking of Elon, this is something that he's been talking about for years now. He's really concerned about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in the documentary, there's even a snippet of him from 2019 of him talking about
I like that.
a fear of a accelerated population decline, right? And so to kind of really kind of get into this, so what's fascinating about this is when all these things started happening in these particular places. So, one of the places where he talks about, and also to one other thing to what you're saying, I thought was also a point that he brought up too was, as this continues, you have fewer and fewer, whether it's doctors trying to develop cures for different things, people that can maintain the infrastructure, all kind of stuff, but also fewer children means fewer mothers, right? In the long run, right? And so it's things like that, right? Because even it's really very powerful, right? When a woman is pregnant with her daughter, right? That little girl that's in utero, right? Herself has the eggs that she will carry as a grown adult woman, right? So in a sense, it's really wild. When a woman is pregnant with her daughter, she's also carrying her grandchildren at the same time, right? I mean, that's crazy. That's powerful, right?
Yeah.
When you think about that,
those eggs are already the next generation, if you want to think about that. But any dude can inseminate multiple. Like, I know that sounds like a lot, but like, you don't need as many men as you would need women.
Yes, I get what you're saying. It's just
because
funny.
there's a limit. There's a finite amount of eggs.
Correct.
There's a lot of other swimmers, but there's only a finite.
There's plenty of those, and you can create
and in the documentary,
forever.
I liked that they were talking about out of those eggs, depending on your age, like what your fertile years are.
Oh yes,
we've talked about this on the show a lot. A lot of these boss babes who want to wait later on in life, and then suddenly, I mean, it was almost comical, especially that TED Talk girl.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, at least she was on the right side of the fence by that point, but she was trying to warn people. But it's like, watch the documentary, you'll like it. But it's like, yeah, we've been saying this.
Right. There's a certain group of people that have been talking about this, and again, luckily we're really getting away from the whole like overpopulation thing, because that was a big thing that started with Dr. Paul Heinrich.
Just kidding.
It just makes common sense. You wear your mask. Oh, 2020. What a wild time. Oh man. So
I'm glad we can laugh about it now, because we were so hot back then. It's just like shake the TV, like get off, like throw your phone, get tired of like social media.
2020 was a wild time. But so one of the big things that was a push for that idea of overpopulation was like Dr. Paul Heinrich, I think is how you say his last name. He wrote like the population bomb, and he was talking about how by the year 2000, or I don't even think by then, but there'd be like global famine. Everybody would be starving to death, right? And was proven wrong, because that was a ridiculous thing to say. And really, actually, as population has grown, right, everything has just gotten better across the world, like on a general level, right, which is pretty interesting. But again, one of the fascinating, biggest things about Dr. Shaw going into this research was that the birth rates in the first three countries he highlights are Italy, Japan, and Germany, and they all started to fall at the exact same time in the early 1970s, right? And so one of the things he wanted to try to figure out is why, right, this is happening, okay? Because you would think that there would be a easy common denominator across them, but culturally and all these other things, right, there wasn't, because, you know, a lot of people will say, well, maybe it was the introduction of birth control, right, of why you saw these birth rates starting to plummet. But when you look at, you know, in the equation with Japan, right, the pill wasn't introduced in Japan until the 1990s. So there's a large gap, right, of time where it wasn't even a possibility, but the birth rates shrinking happened at around the exact same time, right? And so you look at that, so then again, that's where he starts asking this question: well, what is it? What's going on? Like, why is this happening, right? And so,
well, yeah, it's not like it's an issue to necessarily of fewer infants being born healthy. It's just fewer babies being born, period.
Correct.
So it's like, why are people not having kids? So the document did a really good job about saying it's not like less kids, because the same woman that was starting a family originally is still having 2 to 4 kids. It's childlessness. So there's more people choosing just not to have kids, and nobody was knowing why. Like, you're across different cultures, across different times. I mean, you can, one instance, they're like, oh, well, the U.S. financial crisis that happened, you know, in the 70s and then back in 2009, and that has a ripple effect with the world. But other countries are having problems before that even happened.
Right. So you bring up a very interesting point about this, right? Is that, you know, one thing that's connected to a lot of this is, it seems like economic turmoil around these particular points in time have some sort of connection to the falling, again, not less healthy or the healthy babies versus unhealthy babies. It's people having children, period.
Right.
Right. And again, so in the early 1970s, right, with Italy and Europe, there was some economic turmoil, right? There was a big oil shock at that time that affected Japan the most. And that's where you just saw this just skyrocketing of childlessness, right? And around 2007 for the U.S., you saw the same thing happen. And so you kind of pinpoint these things at different points for these different countries, right? They're all kind of similar in that vein. But what's the most interesting thing, and this is what I thought, right? So this is what I thought. This is the biggest, I think, aha moment for me watching this, because I had always assumed, like I think a lot of people did, you just kind of brought this up, that, oh, people are just having less kids.
Right. You're like, oh, I'm going to have one and be done. But as we find, people who actually make the leap to have kids, they like it.
Right.
You tend to have more than one.
Correct.
Because once you've bridged that gap, you're like, oh, this isn't so bad. Or, you know, you get in your head, like, the scariest part about going to the doctor, knowing you're going to get a shot, is the anticipation. Once the shot's done and over with, people are like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Like a roller coaster. I think parenting's a lot like that. There's a lot of like stuff that's swirled around. Like, people have their opinions, or like, oh, don't get married too young. Don't have kids too early. Worry about your future. Make sure you have enough money. Get a house first. Like, you hear all this outside input that eventually, like, you're almost like nervous to have kids. But once you do, you realize, you know, at least for me personally, my life didn't change too much, but I allowed it to change. If I wanted my life to stay the same way, I probably could have did a pretty good job about it. But having a family makes you want to grow in order to better that family. Like, it just shifts. It doesn't have to. And I think all these people are worried about, like, you know, as from mainly the woman point of view, like, they got to focus on their career. I think there's been a huge trend for that. But yeah,
right,
once you have those kids,
yeah,
women are still having 2 to 4 kids on average. The average hasn't changed. It's just people aren't taking that step to have their first one.
Right. And so, and that's what's that was the most like mind-blowing thing of this documentary was, and this goes to the lady that has her TED Talk, right, talking about these childless women, right? And she breaks it down a couple different ways. So 10% of women outright choose not to have children. They have zero desire to have children, all this kind of stuff, right? their prerogative, all that kind of stuff. And there was about another 10% that were childlessness due to infertility, health reasons. So that means there are 80% of women who are kind of have like what she calls unplanned childlessness, or maybe what Dr. Shaw calls it, right? Unintentionally childless.
They just missed their window, or they didn't find their, a proper, suitor. They weren't like in the game.
Well, she says like, oh, maybe not a proper suitor, or even improper, right? She makes the kind of the joke of it. Now, here's what's very fascinating about this, right? Because again, in every country, right, that was the one common denominator that he was able to somewhat find in this particular part of this particular part of the documentary, because there's a part 2 and a part 3 of it, right? But it's the number of women that are not having children in general, which are causing these things to happen. That is actually going up. And what's fascinating is, again, the number of women that, like you said, that were having children. Like, if you look at all the data, right, the amount of mothers who have 2 children, have 3 or 4 more children, has stayed exactly the same.
Yeah.
Right, to your point, people that have kids tend to have multiple kids, right? Because he assumed, like I assumed, like there was a lot more families with 2 or only 1 child. But he's like, I can't find anyone that only has 1 child.
Which is interesting, because I was waiting for this to get brought up, but I noticed there's one country that they didn't talk about at all. And it's very important to me when you're talking about kids, population control, birth gaps.
You're talking about China?
China.
Right.
I mean, they had the 1-child policy, which now they're freaking out about because and
turning into a 3-child policy. But again, no one wants to have kids because you've beaten it into their brain that they shouldn't.
So I found that interesting that they didn't bring up that data.
Well,
but what that data brings up to me,
he may not have been allowed to as part of it.
Maybe
because the Chinese are communists.
Depending on where it was filmed. But he talked. I mean, Japan was a big contender. It did a lot of data, and a lot of the documentary was spent in Japan. South Korea.
South Korea is the worst. South Korea has a 0.98 replacement. Like, they are the worst in the entire world.
Well, South Korea is not going to exist. Very, very techie and industrialized. It's all about rising the ranks. Especially in the last 50 years, they've exploded their economy.
Right. Absolutely. And it was really interesting to find that it's just the number of women not having children. But then, kind of like you said, it's something that we've been talking about, right? People not having children, and specifically women not having children. And what's also important about this, because again, he said he was trying to find these people that only had 1 child, and he interviews people that are a little bit older and people that are younger, in their 20s or late 20s, right? And every single one of them, right? If they're a younger person, they talk about how they have at least 1 sibling, or a lot of them had like 2 or 3 or 4 siblings, all of them, right? Every parent that he talked to, they had 2 kids, they had 3 kids, they had 4 kids, they had 2 kids, all of them, right? And again, to your point, most people, when they have children, they have more than 1. Like, no one has just 1 kid. It just doesn't really happen, right? Unless you're like a weirdo, leftist in America, But you just don't, right? You tend to have multiple children. And I mean, I know I just made the joke about leftists, but even like liberals, like, they have multiple. If they have kids, they have more than 1.
I'm telling you, once you take that first step,
you just do it. You're like, okay, I could do another one.
You don't regret it. At that point, you're like, okay, like, I can do this.
Right.
Which, I don't know. It's another thing they didn't bring up during the documentary, but could be a factor, maybe affecting the stats a little bit. But abortion wasn't brought up. You know how widespread and accessible that is now.
You know what's really funny about you bringing that up? So I sent this to my mom to watch after I watched it. And that was something that she brought up as well. And even as someone who is pro-life, I actually don't think abortion really necessarily matters in the context of the stats that he's taking, only because, like, kind of follow me on here. The reason why that doesn't particularly matter, sort of, in this context, is we know that I think it's either 1 in 4 or so women have had terminated their pregnancy.
So you're saying it's not going to deter them from actually being a mother later?
No.
Okay.
I think what's funny is the women who are mothers, probably at least a third of them have had an abortion. I would almost guarantee it.
Okay.
Right now, where I think obviously that does come into play, right, is in the women that don't have children, right? There's a good portion, a majority of them, or not majority of them, but there's a good percentage of them that have had that happen to them for whatever reason, now, for me, I don't think any of them are justified, but for whatever reason. And so I guess I used the wrong term. I'm not saying that the abortion part of that doesn't matter. I think that was the wrong word to use. But I think in the context, it's not going to really affect what we're talking about here because, again, the women that still do become mothers, there are still a good portion of them that have had one. Mm-hmm. It's just the way the numbers lay out, it's just not possible for that not to be the case. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So
I was thinking somehow maybe it's a psychological factor that what they went through, that maybe they weren't likely, but
here's the thing. Now here's where it can come in, right? Like those women that have fertility issues, right? It has been known that can be a side effect of you going through that procedure, right?
Well, so there's more than one. I think like the scarring and everything else.
Especially if you've had more than one, mm-hmm. right? But then also the women that don't do it at all, right? The women that are just, or that's what we're talking about. Sorry. For the childless women, a lot of them have gotten one.
Well, it's funny because originally when we started this, you brought up birth control as not being a factor of what kind of kick-started this epidemic on a worldwide scale, because when it was accessible, which countries had it, but especially now, if anything, it's just going to accelerate. I mean, there are people who have been on birth control since they were a teenager, that they only have gotten it off when they get married or maybe when they're wanting to start trying to have kids. There is a huge, what's the word? I get recovery period once you get off because of your hormones and everything else. Mm-hmm. People think you can just get off and boom, you can get pregnant. There are more people that have been they were under this misconception that they thought that, I can just get off and have it. And they've kind of messed up their life. They're they've wasted some of their earlier years, or they're in their 30s even struggling because their endocrine system's all jacked up because they've been on birth control for so long, right. 20 years.
So I think in that instance, which is something we have talked about, I think you bring up a very good point. Going forward from here is I don't think we understand the ramifications of hormonal birth control mm-hmm. when it comes to this issue, right? That is this right here is 50 years in the making.
Yes.
Of getting to this point, right?
But nobody
it's been 50 years of not of being below replacement level, right? Because all mm-hmm. these countries have been for the last 50 years have been below replacement level. So that's why it's gotten into where it's at this tipping point, right? And so now going forward for countries like the US and everything, right? When you have now millennials who mm-hmm. are in their 30s who again have been on hormonal
birth control.
Hormonal birth control.
There you go.
They've been on it for so long.
Usually it's me getting all tongue-tied.
At least a decade, like you said, if not longer.
Yeah.
And expecting, because again, what people don't realize is, or I think maybe women realize, but don't understand the ramification per se, is when you've had your body in that mode basically for an unbelievable unnatural amount of time, it's going to have devastating consequences to your ability to have children.
A couple different things. I mean, if you got hormonal birth control, then you've got the the IUDs, whatever. And some of those are hormonal as well on a lower dose, and some of them are hormonal free. But either way, if it's just the regular pill, which there's several, and their dosage and everything varies, your body, a female's body, changes. They don't even get a menstrual cycle. Mm-hmm. And if they do, it's a day or two. So when you finally get off this hormones, it's like when a dude's been roiding at the gym and they've been on cycle. By the time they finally get off cycle, their body has a suddenly oh crap, you've been taking care of the whole testosterone thing for so long. now the levels are out of whack, and I've got to start making my own testosterone again. Mm-hmm. And like your balls are going in overdrive. You got to start doing all that again, and your body's like trying to freak out. Like same thing with women, you know what I mean? Like something like, okay, we got to remember how to like do all this, and you know, and how much estrogen to produce, and on top of all the other, you know, hormones are. And then you want to get even crazier with the IUDs. Those can be up there for, it's been a while since I even needed to remember all this, but like 5 years minimum, 10 years, however long, without even having to touch them or do anything. So with those, you're tricking your body into thinking there's a pregnancy.
Yeah.
So you're not getting a period at all. So imagine having something like that for 5 years, maybe more, and then getting it removed, thinking you can start getting ready. If there's not scarring. And I know this is like a kind of graphic, but it's just making
reality.
A point.
It's reality.
Your body's not going to know what to do because it's thought it was pregnant for 5 years.
Yeah.
There are people who won't get a period for like 6 months after getting something like that removed. Your body's just trying to figure things out. You've messed with nature. I mean,
and there's going to be consequences.
And nobody's sitting there telling that 15-year-old girl whose mom, you know, or maybe she went on her own because she was worried about the future and everything. There's nobody telling her that I know of. Maybe leave something in the comments saying, hey, well, actually the doctors are pretty good about, you know, explaining long-term side effects. You know, you're more worried about short-term. Oh, you may get dizzy. You may do this, you know, if you're nauseous or have heavy bleeding, consult your physician. Nobody's talking about, hey, in 20 years, you may not be able to have children. Like, to my knowledge, like that's something that, you know, it's like Beth in Yellowstone, man. Like this, like really affects somebody's like future down the road. I don't know. On top of that, and if you want to get into the other like infertility issues, like all the processed ingredients and stuff that are in the seed oils that are in our food, freaking Red 40 or whatever that it is, that half of the EU and everything's banned, but it's in like pretty much, it's in like half our food at the grocery stores here in the U.S. That's known to like cause cancer and everything else. Like any number of things could be affecting infertility.
Absolutely. 100%.
On top of you just choosing not to have kids.
Right.
So
you have all these different things. I mean, you laid it out absolutely perfectly. And
thanks.
You're welcome. And I think, you know, when it comes to that, again, we are so concerned with the immediate gratification of things that we don't look at the long-term side effects of the decisions that we are making, right, for right now. And you know, what's really interesting is, again, you know, one of the portions of the documentary, he's interviewing like an elementary school teacher.
That dude almost looked high, though.
Well, it's Switzerland, so.
Well, it's funny because his eye sockets were red, but not his eyeballs. So at first I'm like, this dude looks high. And then you start looking, I'm like, it's just hay fever, you know?
I don't know. Hay fever.
Sorry to cut you off.
Why are people in Switzerland sounding British?
Well, that's the TikTok sound. It's just hay fever.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking? I wasn't trying to imitate the Swede.
I forgot about that sound. It's just hay fever.
Are you crying? It's just hay fever. Like, or whatever it is.
God, TikTok's so stupid. It's so funny. The thing I sent you yesterday with the pig calls.
Oh my gosh. And then the corn cob hat guy. But it was like edited and like with okay.
Oh, the internet's so stupid. Anyway, what was I even talking about? Yeah.
The elementary school teacher.
Yeah. And he was talking about how they're noticing, you know, their class sizes are getting smaller and smaller. And that's where in this conversation he's having with Dr. Shaw, he's having the realization, like, I may be out of a job in 10 years. Like, if there's not kids, you can't have teachers if there aren't kids. You can't have schools if there's no kids.
That's when you start switching. I think I'm going to be a middle school teacher now. And now I'm a high school. Time to be a professor. Like, you're just aging out with the kids.
Just falling out. And so, but that's interesting. That's right. It's fascinating, right? Because as this is going to continue to happen, right? You are going to see that, right? I think what it was, I can't remember what country it was, right? Oh yeah, it was Japan, right? Where the sale of adult diapers is higher than the sale of regular diapers. That is a red flag.
That's a wake up call.
Hello, yeah, like sirens blaring, like our society is crumbling, like we need to do something, right?
Well, it's funny because it seems like in Japan, you need to invest in retirement homes or, hospice care. Like that could be your moneymaker. When I was watching the documentary, about halfway, 3/4 of the way through it, I told myself, and I turned to my wife too, I'm like, with everything going on, I'm like, the next cash cow, I need to start investing in fertility clinics. Some kind of put your money in stocks in that, because that was another part of the documentary too, is like, I know we were just talking about with birth control and everything, but other than that, these people who are waiting later and later in life to try, and their chances are smaller and smaller because, out of the fewer eggs that drop compared to when you're 20s versus 30s or 40s, it's fewer and fewer each month. And out of those, the documentary does a really good job of explaining like only like a third of those are even like good.
Right. Yeah. So that portion I thought was really great too. Yeah. Cause that fertility doctor. Yeah. So what Taylor's talking about is Stephen is interviewing this doctor, and he pours out a bunch of candies, right? They're orange
Starburst.
And like yellow. Is it Starburst? Yeah. So Starburst. So it's like orange and like yellow Starburst. Okay. And so he says like a healthy 20-year-old, right? Let's say that she produces 5 eggs, right? 4 out of those 5 are good,
yeah,
right? Because she's healthy, but still 1 or 2 out of them may not be, good, right? Then you fast forward to when you're 40, right? Now it's 1 out of the 5 are actually good, and so to your point, it's going to be harder and harder for you to actually be able to take that child, right, and carry them through to term, right? Because even for that good egg that actually fertilizes, right, it's still not as healthy as the healthy egg from being 20 years old, right? So even then, you're still playing this gambling game, right? And the funniest part of this documentary is there's a little portion where he asks these people about, a lot of them are in their late 20s or like mid 30s. Like, are you like, are you ready to have kids, or do you want kids? And all the women give the same stupid feminist answer.
Yeah.
Okay. And I say it's stupid. I'll get back to that. And they all say, well, I'm working on my career. I want to make sure I'm established. I want to do this. I want to do this. Right? Now, granted, all these women are 27 to like 35 years old. And here's the thing. The ones that are 30 and up, time's ticking, right? And father time is very unforgiving.
Yeah. Well, very that one chick who was like, I need to wait till I have enough money. And then the doctor was like, well, what number?
When is that?
What is that number? When is it enough money? And then she was like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. She's like,
and even after you showed these people,
the way she answers is the best though. The way she answers, she's like, I don't know. And that's the dumbest answer, because that means it's infinite. It's infinite because there is no definition. There's no idea of an actual point that we're getting to, because here's what I think is that they don't want to have an actual point.
Well,
because
even when you make people aware, those people, you even make them aware of the problem, and they're, some of them are kind of shocked and all that, and at the end of it, like, so are you gonna maybe rethink this and have kids?
No.
And like, nah. They still go back to their, this is me in my life. That's other people's problem.
Right. Well, and that's just the I would say on the U.S.'s front. Right, this lie that has been sold to women that they think they have all the time in the world, right? Or worse is, and this is something that happens in the beginning of the documentary, they believe they can change the mind of their partner, right? Because in the very beginning of it, it starts with this woman who is being interviewed. She's in Thailand.
Yeah,
she's crying because of the fact that she is divorced, right? We don't know how. I don't think it says how old she is, but she's probably in her mid 30s or so,
I would
probably.
Say late 30s, it looked like.
Yeah, mid to late 30s, most likely, and well past her window. Right, well past her window, and she's upset because she's talking about her ex-husband, who she thought basically she could convince to have children, and he did not change his mind, and so therefore they end up getting divorced, and this woman is now in her late 30s. Right, with zero prospects of the one thing that she wanted to be, which was to be a mother. Right, it's over. It's over for her, because even men her age, right, let's say that are in their late 30s, 40s, right, are not interested in someone like her. They're interested in someone who is 10 years younger than she is, in their 20s, that are fertile and are able to have children.
Yeah.
That is the reality, right? We can say that's not fair, but that is the reality. And at the end of the film, there's several conversations, right, with women who are all the same thing. I thought I had more time. I should have dated more. This. I should have done this. I should have done that. I should have done this. But they were under this guise that they had for all this time in the world, and they don't, right? And that's that 80% of women, right, who are childless without even like they wanted to be moms. They wanted to have children. They wanted to be wives, but they just didn't make it important enough. They didn't, whatever.
They
right?
just missed the boat.
Yeah, they missed the boat,
For
and it's over.
whatever reason, it's usually selfish when they're just focusing on themselves, their career, their school, or finding the right partner, and then it's too late, too little, too late. Or even if they finally do find that partner, and then they can't. And if they weren't smart enough to freeze their embryos early on, which is expensive, and I like that the documentary kind of talked about, at one of the doctors, for the fertility doctors, we're talking about a common misconception is people think that with all these celebrities getting married later and having these kids that they can too. But what's behind that green screen that is Hollywood is a lot of these probably froze their embryos, or that they're getting help or in vitro or things like that. And the price tag doesn't scare them because they're celebrities.
Right. They can chunk $40,000 at something because who cares? Right. And you're absolutely right. And that's like a really heartbreaking part of it is we think, the average person thinks they can do that too, but they cannot. Right. Because to your point, like, yeah.
Or they take out loans trying for 6 months. Right. Which has got to be defeating as it is. And they still not come out successful.
Right. And that's what that one Japanese fertility doctor talks about. She says, like, it's emotionally traumatic because, like, again, the misconception is you can just do it and it's no problem. Number one, you probably can afford it. Number two, it's probably actually not going to work. It's probably not going to work. And
I would say most of the time it doesn't.
Yeah. It's so you're going to be
a blessing when it does.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be the obvious financial, but it's going to be emotionally, I would say also spiritually and mentally, it's going to destroy you.
And financially draining. It's just draining.
Right. I mean, financially is the obvious one, but then all these other ways. And so you have nothing but defeat.
I mean, a lot of people end up divorced after going through trying to do in vitro. And I think there's other terms and other, besides just in vitro now, but any of those type of, I don't know, pregnancy tricks.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think it's hard to say because obviously there's a part 2 and a part 3 that you have to go to birth. Although apparently there is one person on YouTube that has part 2, maybe. You found it. I don't know. We didn't watch it, but there's a part 2 and 3. So who knows how much else or how much more Dr. Shaw goes into this, right? This is a multi-year
I wonder
project.
if it spans different time. Like now we have 2022 data or something like that. Right. And I kind of see how this progresses a little bit. Or I was talking to my wife even about this because I know we're kind of hitting that time, but like even how COVID affected this. Because I was talking to her last night. I said, this is all pre-pandemic. I said, this is probably exacerbated now, even more so.
Yeah.
Like post-pandemic. People stuck in, people not getting out, meeting partners, meeting spouses, or people who are stuck in their home, wondering what the life world's going to be like, so they don't even want to have a family because, like, why am I going to bring a kid in this kind of world? It's crazy.
Well, 100%, and also you think about it, a lot of times it's connected to, large financial crises, which for a good number of people, right? I don't think 2020 was as bad as the 07 financial crisis by any means, but still,
it is a factor.
It was a factor. So, right. So, how else does that negatively affect besides the things that you said?
To that point, I don't think it's a factor for those who already have a family.
Oh no.
So, if you've already had a family, or if you already have a child, you kind of realize, okay, $40 a month for diapers, whatever. Other than that, it's not really this huge burden. Life comes and goes. Most of the time with starting family, I find myself, and we've talked about this to length, more motivated to get that better job. It pushes you, and it accelerates your life because you have this factor, this driving force. But to those who haven't had at least their first, they're going to see the stock market's coming down, inflation going up, rent's $2,000 a month now, and I can't buy a house because interest rates are so high. So I'm going to wait to start a family. Those factors that are right now that the interest rates and everything that I just said, people are going to put starting families on the back burner, waiting for that to calm down. Well, I'll wait till I get my next promotion, or I'll wait till I've got a down payment for a house first, or, this car has been acting up, so I kind of need a reliable car before I even start to have a family. Like, there's money plays on your,
on your decisions. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, what's funny about that too is I was listening to Jordan Peterson this morning.
Where are you now?
I was. And, he was talking about, it was a little bit about, having children, this particular one, this question he was answering. And he was like, look, one thing you have to understand is there's no such thing as a perfect time to have children. He's actually like, there, it's never a good time, right? But it's necessary. You need to do it. It's going to make your life better. It's going to make you better, all this kind of stuff. And that's, I think, what's so funny. I think you and I have talked about this too. I'm not on here maybe, but certainly personally, is that people are so worried about getting to a certain status point before having children. And I'm sure, and again, don't get me wrong, like, you should always strive to be the best that you can be in every aspect. Like, man, woman, you should do that, right? Because, you deserve nothing less than the best for yourself, right? In certain sense, like, you should give everything you got for yourself, but also, like, that, and this goes back to like that girl's answer when she was asked, like, when will it be the right time? The answer is there isn't. There's never going to be a time that's perfect, right? Because there's always going to be the next thing you're trying to do, the next thing, and so it's like, you got to just do it, and then bring the kids along for the ride. You know what I mean? You got to just, you got to, and bring your family along for the ride, especially from the men's perspective. Like, you got to just do it, right? You may not be perfectly in the right place, right? You're not making exactly the money you want to make, but guess what?
I wasn't when I started, and times were freaking hard.
I was broke as a joke when I first
ramen and hot dog dinners. But you know what? Looking back, there was times I remember being happier then than I am now. As you continue to age, responsibilities increase, work stresses, everything. Like, at least those times were simpler. I'm not saying they weren't. They were easy, but those times are hard. The broke, like, okay, I'll take this vehicle because this one still has half a tank. The other one, I've got to wait 2 days because it's on E because we don't get paid
till a paycheck. Yeah,
that is stressful. That will make or break a marriage too. But at least you're coming home to like a roof over your head and kids that are happy to see you. Like, there's just nothing. There's something about that just makes everything else fade away. So to your point, like, there is no perfect time. Mm-hmm. But to the people who are so worried about when the perfect time is, I would say that you don't really want to have a family to begin with.
Yeah, for me personally, I a lot of times think it's just an excuse to shed themselves of that responsibility of having children.
If you're making excuses now and it's finances, you're going to find an excuse later on when your finances level off. It's going to be like, well, we just got comfortable, and I know you wanted to take that trip to Italy that we've been saving up for. Mm-hmm. You're going to put it off. It's not always just going to be about the money. It's well, we did talk about doing this. And if you're pregnant, think, well, that's 9 months from now. So you're going to be pregnant during the summer. We should probably wait till next spring. And then it's just one thing after another. It's never the opportune time.
It's a refusal to even slightly inconvenience yourself of what you want there in the moment. Again, instant gratitude that you must have.
Honestly, the best case scenario for those type of people, those type of would-be parents, is the accidental births.
Yeah.
Oh, oops, you're pregnant. Like, and then, it forced their hand. Because I would say everybody else, I mean, they choose to be parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, and that's where it's, again, hey, look, if you have a desire, if you are, a lady that listens to us, and you still haven't done it, you're not married, hey, and you're getting into your late 20s, hey, like, come on, like, just get on with it, right? Find somebody. Like, well, I can't find a good guy. Well, go to church. Right, there's probably one there.
Go to the right places.
Yeah,
and if you're not ready, at least
don't go to the club, or don't go to the bar. Okay,
I'm not saying like
go to church.
Find a guy in college, but at least 25, 24, 27, at least start that process of finding somebody serious. Because at that point, boys are kind of doing the same thing. They want to find, I would say young men around 25, 26 are ideally.
If you're in the right place, they have a desire to be a husband and be a dad.
Most do. I would say at that point.
Not all of them, but yeah, most do. If you're
not,
in the right spot.
Maybe finding a little bit older of a guy. You know how women like to date older guys. So if you're 27, he's a 30-year-old guy, you're kind of in that ballpark. But again, Father Time's not your friend.
Hey, even if you're a girl and you're 25, the dude's 30.
But you don't want to wait till you're 35 and establish and then start trying to find a mate. Because then, I mean, you're going to have to build that relationship.
Right.
Ideally get married. And then you want to enjoy your early years of marriage before you have kids.
That takes a couple of years. And then all of a sudden you're almost 40 and you don't have a kid yet. And you're kind of weird because you're married without a kid.
Yeah, not too scary. I mean, shoot.
Me and my wife were... If you're 40.
I think me and the wife had a good 6 months, just us, before she was pregnant.
Yeah, we had... on our 9th month of marriage, our son was born. So...
Yeah. Boom.
You know, just get it over with. But hey, you know what? I wouldn't I wouldn't do it any other way.
No. Especially looking back. I mean, me and my wife made a choice. We were both excited. We both wanted it. I wish I would maybe had 1 full year of just me and her. There's some things I'd like to do and see, because kids do kind of hold you back with at least traveling. But other than that, it wouldn't change a single thing. And I've got 3, so I'm tipping that scale.
Yeah, me too. So we're doing our part. So you need to do yours.
But remember, it's not about us. It's about childlessness as a whole. So it takes you. If both of us had 4 or 5, it doesn't change anything because you.
Yeah, you don't have kids, so you got to do something about it.
It's like that old Uncle Sam propaganda.
Yeah,
we want you
to have babies. On that note, you know what? Fuck it. We'll see you next week.
Later.